in 2013, first-person survival horror game Outlast swept through the gaming community like a backshot through a booty cheek. Outlast took the survival horror recipe from titles like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, focusing on an audibly terrified young protagonist that leans 100% flight, 0% fight, who must climb out of whichever hornet's nest they found themselves in by any means necessary. The Outlast Whistleblower DLC followed in 2014, Outlast 2 in 2016, Outlast 2 Switch in 2017, and at long last, Outlast Trials debuted on Early Access in May 2023, 10 years after the first, with an official release in May 2024. The Wikipedia article for developers Red Barrel very hopefully lists Outlast 3 in its timeline of productions as to be announced, which I felt was quite cheeky. To say Outlast Trials had a mixed reception would be to frame this discussion a little awkwardly. Outlast 2 had a mixed reception, so this installment is no outlier. Neither game that followed Outlast managed to recapture the spirit that made the original Outlast so prolific. In the case of Outlast 2, the claustrophobic creaking hallways of Mount Massive Asylum were replaced with an enormous open plain, rendering it less easy to understand why one may be trapped there, why protagonist Blake doesn't flee for help. In a horror game, you want to eliminate any doubt that the player character could just up and leave, leaving even a slight possibility that one could run away and bring back help, even if it's small, does a lot to build player frustration when said character narrowly escapes getting literally crucified and buried alive, only to pick up their sleeping bag and trail mix and keep rushing into the crucible of madness. And in the case of Outlast Trials, whilst firmly reassuring us there is indeed zero escape for the player character, the concise, carefully crafted and immensely isolating single-player story was replaced with a live service co-op jamboree that spread itself wide but thin. Despite how differently Outlast Trials plays to Outlast 1 and 2, it's a prequel to both games. It takes the existing lore of the series and runs a marathon with it. I'm gonna have to offer some background here for viewers who may not be on the same page, but it will be fun and interesting, so bear with me. In Outlast Trials, the good citizens of America are being kidnapped by shadowy corporation Murkoff, who put them through comprehensive trials teaching them maths, science, and programming skills. Oh no, wait, that's brilliant. If you're ever looking to expand your STEM skills, either to get on the ladder or to bolster an existing career in the field, or if you're curious about whether it would be a good fit for you in the first place, try Brilliant today. Brilliant is a fantastically comprehensive skills-based learning app delivering interactive hands-on lessons that are refreshed monthly with new stuff added all the time. You can do your lessons from any device, so get your learning done on the go. It's a great way to spend a commute or get out of the habit of doom scrolling every morning before you get out of bed. Try the case study on viral Twitter posts they recently added. Level 2 of the data course introduces probability with a course called Case Study Going Viral on X, which is a course focused on helping you understand how posts go viral on Twitter and how to tell real posts from fake ones. I think applications like this are so interesting. Try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/merkkk either via the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. If you played the first Outlast, you may be familiar with Project Walrider, a project investigative journalist and protagonist Miles Upshur unfortunately stumbles into when following a lead from a whistleblower within the Mount Massive Asylum, where the mysterious Murkoff Corporation were performing inhumane and cruel experiments on its patients. Mount Massive Asylum had actually been closed once before, 1971. It wasn't specified why, although we know that 3 scientists were killed by an unknown individual in 1967, 4 years before, and those events may have had something to do with it. Reopened in 2009 by the Murkoff Corporation under the pretense of charity and treatment, Project Walrider slowly found its feet. In this 2013 setting, the Murkoff Corporation are dancing with the devil. They're attempting to create an entity they refer to as the Walrider. The term Walrider comes from German folklore, and since many of the scientists working at Murkoff were Nazi scientists traded to the USA under the, again, real-life Project Paperclip, it makes sense they'd pick a nickname they were familiar with. Walriders, or Alps, are creatures said to originate from the mountains of Germany, just as the Walrider originated from Mount Massive. They can fly, turn invisible, and shapeshift. It was the perfect nickname for a creature so refined that the player will surely initially assume it's a ghost of some kind, some mythological creature. It's a huge, scary black ghost entity that flies through walls and doors and the player themselves, burning strange images into your vision. If you look carefully, you can see his eyes watching you from television screens as you explore. As the events of the game roll on, you come to find that any assumptions of the supernatural were merely assumptions assumptions of the preternatural. The Wall Rider is science, pure and simple. Specifically, the Wall Rider was a swarm of nanomachines that could only be controlled by people who had undergone a harrowing process of suffering. The host of the Wall Rider needed to be a person who had suffered immensely and known all sorts of pain and trauma, at which point they would be put through the morphogenic engine. The idea was that extreme mental states triggered a psychosomatic response in the patient's body. A psychosomatic response is essentially when a person's body reacts physically to mental stress, like getting bloated and constipated when you're stressed. Don't interrogate too closely why that was the example I chose to give you. Anyway, the assumption behind the Wall Rider research was that patients who reached this level of sustained heightened stress, enough to have a psychosomatic response, would be more receptive to the nanoswarm. Dr. Wernicke, hiding safely behind his big glass window, remarked, only a test subject who had witnessed enough horror was capable of activating the engine. Although the Wall Rider initially waited patiently within the host of Billy, a heavily abused patient kept captive on a futuristic life support system at Mount Massive Asylum, it soon turned its gaze to Miles Upshur, who roamed freely. Miles goes to hell and back trying to escape the asylum. He falls from great heights, gets his fingers chopped off, gets chased and thrown and beaten, and as much as he tries to leave that asylum, he never makes it out. That is, not without the Wall Rider, who possesses him shortly before his escape. Outlast 2 follows this story chronologically and thematically, encountering a village of people who believe that God has heralded them the end times, and have begun to spiral rapidly in all the ways you might expect. Protagonist Blake Langerman stumbles through this hellish commune in search of his kidnapped wife Lynn. Only, as with Outlast, we once again find there to be nothing supernatural about this at all. It is all revealed to be another Murkoff experiment, wherein radio waves of specific frequencies are blasted across the secluded community to trigger horrific hallucinations many of them came to interpret as grim but godly visions of the future, especially near the mines where Lynn has been taken. A note found by the lake in Outlast 2 revealed employees of the Murkoff Corporation referring to the village as subjects, making bets about what kinds of behaviour the radio waves would trigger. They've been watching this circus of worship and human sacrifice and grievous mutilation and war and plague the entire time, caring nothing for the inhabitants of Temple's Gate. In fact, they're entertained by it. Lynn's pregnancy turns out to be a phantom pregnancy that progresses from 0 to 100 in the roughly 3 days it takes Blake to find her, at which point she gives birth to nothing and promptly dies. Although, playing through Blake's eyes, you will see a baby, even if Lynn doesn't, and even if it doesn't cast a shadow. This is a reference to Outlast 1, where female patients were removed from Mount Massive, hence the abandoned female ward you crawl through in the latter half of the game, because experiments with the morphogenic engine caused phantom pregnancies in all nearby women, likely the Wall Rider trying to reverse engineer a host if it can't find one to literally possess. Cool detail, very creepy. Outlast Trials takes place in 1959, 50 years before Outlast is set, and halfway through the Cold War. Obviously, the Cold War, Project Paperclip, and MK Ultra happened in real life, but Outlast takes a somewhat embellished interpretation, injecting far more technological success into the output of those projects than we ever saw in real life, such as the creation of the Wall Rider. Although the Wall Rider is not present in Outlast Trials, the Murkoff Corporation are, in its infancy. In Outlast Trials, the Murkoff Corporation are back at it, or rather, first at it, conducting experiments on society's most neglected in a project they titled Project Lathe, a slightly contrived title for Project Limbic Aggression Therapy, and later Project Latent Agency Therapy. Yes, the THE, is the first 3 letters of therapy, but thematically appropriate at least. A lathe is an extremely dangerous piece of machinery with uses in basically every factory application you can imagine. They are notoriously deadly. I've only ever seen 1 or 2 of those live leak videos in my time, but one of them was a man in Russia who wound up snagged by one and was turned to meat in a second flat, spinning uselessly on one of the miscellaneous rotating parts of the lathe he was operating. Don't go and watch it. It was horrible. Although it's a contrived name for the work taking place within Outlast Trials, a lathe is a surprisingly fitting analogy because it serves as an effective allegory for all the things happening to its subjects at once. As we've seen, Murkoff likes to work with a large sample size, and the events of Outlast Trials saw its largest sample size of all time. The subjects in Project Lathe were referred to as reagents, an extremely telling terminology. Reagents, in our context, are substances used in chemical experimentation. They're substances that are added to other substances to see if there's a specific reaction or if there's a a reaction at all. In Outlast Trials, these are a collection of vulnerable people who responded to a flyer advertising Murkoff's charity program, only to wind up abducted off the streets and stolen away for experimentation. This was completely intentional. The initial Project Lathe failed, and all subjects were liquidated. We're actually playing Project Lathe 2. Project Lathe failed because, as director Dr. Easterman explained, the subjects needed to be worthless to society because worthless people are less expensive to steal. They needed to be mentally sound so that Murkoff could break and reshape them however they liked with no existing complications, and they could never be shown his face. Dr. Easterman would talk to them as a shadowy figure, a visage. With that, Project Lathe 2 began in 1956, and the game is set in 1959. Outlast Trials doesn't just follow its predecessors in the case of iconic night vision goggles, the intense chase scenes characteristic of the Outlast series, or the use of unkillable, unfightable antagonists. The game continues along the same politically charged spine, making observations on deeply exploitative government torture and experimentation, and the use of insane psychopathic human villains. Though it might be easy to miss on your first heart-thundering run through Outlast, or seem from a glance to serve as your run-of-the-mill evil scientist overreach story, Outlast is deeply grounded in its damning observations of systemic violence and discrimination, themes it wears proudly on its sleeve. Outlast is about how society forgets and abandons its most vulnerable. It's about how government and big corporations will torture individuals to brutal ends if it means just one more, typically militaristic, breakthrough. It's about how greed will always overcome humanity, and ultimately it's about how the greatest evil is the evil in a suit, smiling pleasantly as it tells you that your death will provide a lot of value to its shareholders. That said, it's debatable as to whether the first Outlast game did this competently. There are two main antagonists in Outlast. Firstly, Murkoff, the shadowy, somewhat government corporation who uses mentally ill, isolated people as fodder for torturous experiments. And secondly, Chris Walker, a prior inmate who has realised that the Walrider is looking for a host, and therefore takes it upon himself to brutally murder every possible host in the building. And remember, he was an inmate here. He is not in a mental state to communicate the issue to Miles and send him home with a goodie bag. Still, neither of these antagonists serve as the horror for the setting. It might be tense and frightening to be chased by Chris Walker. It might be morally revolting to see the experiments performed by Murkoff find horrific conclusion, but the set dressing used to repulse the player, to creep them out, to jump scare them, the physical horror, the tension, is the variants, the in-universe term for the inmates of Mount Massive themselves, referred to in a derogatory fashion by the employees of the asylum. These so-called variants are mentally ill individuals who have been experimented on to the point of irreversible physical disfigurement and insanity. The point is that they're insane. The point is that they're ugly and unnerving, and as such, the point itself is missed. Woo, spooky. The real evil is humanity itself, ruining the lives of thousands of vulnerable people in the pursuit of malicious technology, only theoretically useful in serving military ambition, is a final story message that grinds hollow against the actual gameplay featuring you being grabbed and screamed at and jolted by said vulnerable people with melted faces and eyes removed and stitched up mouths. The victims are the horror in Outlast, so while I find the game excellent, I found the central message to be inherently flawed. On the other hand, while Outlast 2 was, for me, lower quality as a game, the message regarding the dehumanization of vulnerable people by for-profit, ontologically evil companies was much more robust, with a story revolving around a small commune turned cult living remotely out in Arizona, interpreting their unexplainable hallucinations as the word of God warning them of the end times. Outlast 2 drills into both the true fundamental evil required to toy with a group of isolated individuals, literally to play God, and the desperate hubris of the people who took those messages and used them as justification to commit acts of unspeakable evil themselves. There are no good people in Outlast 2, and while the townsfolk are victims, they're certainly not sympathetic. By Outlast Trials, the political messages were so beyond satire that they're basically parody. Outlast Trials begins in a surgery room. On a TV screen you see the Murkoff logo flash up, a familiar sight to anyone who's played the series so far, and a man draped in shadow begins a pre-recorded speech. Don't be afraid, he tells you, as one of the masked doctors squeezes syringes of liquid into your tear ducts, making your eyesight flood with a weird yellow colour. His voice is quickly drowned out. During this process, another doctor removes a pair of night vision goggles from a ruined corpse nearby, and after a brief back and forth between the two, where they discuss you as though you're not even able to understand what they're saying, they take the mask and drill it into your skull. The intro to Outlast Trials begins in a simple web of corridors leading you into a huge colonial mansion. I love the visuals of this introduction. It's a beautiful, classically American mansion, all symmetrical with a bleached white facade, a gorgeous porch and pillars. It's all American, and yet the mansion looks so strange and out of place here, bordered by cold steel girders and wrapped in chain-link fences and spikes. The dim lighting illuminates the structure from the bottom, casting the upper floors in an uncomfortable shadow, hiding untold horrors within. This approach is the most impactful shot of the game, hands down. It is superbly memorable and feels a little allegorical, at least to me. In this house we are told to locate our public and private records and destroy them in a huge meat grinder on the upper floor. As we do so, we are leapt upon and accosted by Mother Gooseberry, resident prime asset, a member of the experimental population, or X-Pop, who enjoyed violence so much that they basically let her live out her freakish dreams here in the trials. Evading her neatly, grinding up your old records, you set yourself free from the ties that bind you to the world outside and are thrust into the trials compound, where your new life begins. Outlast Trials is structured in a simple way. Your downtime is spent in a large hub area. Every player in the lobby will have a bedroom in this hub area that they can decorate how they wish, and they can wander around speaking to the vendors to have their abilities upgraded, play chess with other inmates, arm wrestle, play some video games, check stats and scores, and organise their next trial. Up to 4 people can enter a trial at once. There's a few different types. We have the main 6, which fall under the umbrella term Project Genesis, described in-game as the Path to Rebirth. These trials are called Kill the Snitch, Grind the Bad Apples, Vindicate the Guilty, Pervert the Futterman, and Poison the Medicine, which we will be thoroughly discussing soon enough, don't you worry. Up until I was literally writing this script, you could also select MK challenges from here to do too, which are minor challenges related to the larger trials, but it appears they've been moved onto a rotation basis now. We also have Escalation Therapy, my favourite program actually, where you and your team start with nothing and complete trials in an endless sequence. Every trial you complete grants you a ton of rewards to make the following trials easier, but the trials move up in difficulty quickly. There will always be a third program at any one time, typically the weekly program for the committed, weekly tasks and challenges to keep the game fresh. This can sometimes host theme programs, such as Christmas's Winter Kills program, the Primetime program where multiple prime assets will be roaming in every trial, or the program Geister, where hallucination effects are more intense. In the hub area you will pick a trial, load it up, hop into the little pods when the shuttle arrives, and when you're in the shuttle you'll be shown a visual demonstration of some of the horrors awaiting you alongside an in-universe audio introduction to the lesson you're about to be imparted. And then the games begin. Right, so fascism. What is fascism? Naturally, that's a question a good deal of political scientists and professors have differing opinions on, but bluntly, and to specifically quote Merriam-Webster, fascism is a populist political philosophy, movement or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual, that is associated with a centralised autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, that is characterised by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition. While a lot of academics can't find total agreement on the definition of fascism, it's at least understood that it's an autocratic form of government that utilises high militarism and a dictator, with seemingly contradictory views. For example, using collectivist language when defining the state, but implementing racial hierarchies even when those races are a part of the state, which was a tactic used by Nazi Germany to distinguish what they considered to be the master race. Aryan people with blonde hair, blue eyes and big old foreheads. Fascists generally also espouse other right-wing and far-right views, like irredentism, institutionalised misogyny and imperialism, and use this to fuel concepts like machismo, which we'll explore as we go. Although fascism has been discussed and unpacked by professors across the planet, we're going to look at the work of Umberto Eco. We could look at multiple. Robert Paxton of Columbia University's work is pretty compelling, for instance, but we'll be focusing specifically on Umberto because his work is easily the most universally accepted, commonly found when researching fascism, and accessible to the general reader. In his 1995 essay, Umberto Eco listed 14 general properties of fascist ideology. He emphasized that it's not necessary for them to be part of a system for this to be a symptom of fascism. Rather, it is enough that one of them be present to allow fascism to coagulate around it, basically suggesting that any combination of these properties can exist for fascism to grow off the back of it, like leaving a sandwich in your bag until it gets mouldy. The 14 properties of fascism are: number 1, the cult of tradition. The idea behind the cult of tradition is that human civilization has existed for approximately 300,000 years of slow development, evolution, and societal progression. If If I was to stand up today and go, okay, right now in the year 2024, society has finished evolving. This is it, this is perfect, this is literally as far as we ever need to go. We keep all of our laws and customs exactly as they are right now. We no longer need to learn anything, we no longer need to grow. We're done. The flawed reasoning behind the cult of tradition is that this very moment is the truth. Moving forwards or backwards would be a lie. We keep things exactly as I've decided are perfect, despite the fact that human history is a rich tapestry of growth and change. We freeze it how it is now. This is traditional. 2. The rejection of modernism. This property of fascism goes hand in hand with the cult of tradition, being that it is arguably the other side of the same coin. We keep the tradition exactly as it is and reject modernism. This is also referred to as irrationalism, because it associates Enlightenment and the Age of Reason with modern depravity. This is one of the most contradictory fascist beliefs, because fascists often end up picking and choosing what they consider depraved modernity and what they consider justified or even good. In the case of Nazism, the value of modernity was filtered through a lens of race. Good modernity is any technology produced by the superior Aryan master race. Bad modernity, weak, depraved modernity, was any modernity attributed to other races, such as jazz music, which was seen as black people music, but was often also performed by Jewish people. Number 3, the cult of action for action's sake. According to Umberto, the cult of action for action's sake refers to the concept that action is beautiful in itself. It must be taken before or without any previous reflection. Thinking is a form of emasculation. Essentially, act first, think later, or never at all. Thinking is too feminine. Number 4, disagreement is treason. Again, disagreement is treason is fairly self-explanatory. Fascism opposes criticism and devalues intellectual discourse and critical reasoning. If you think too hard about what you're doing, you might start to notice issues with your logic. And if you notice issues with your logic, it might mean what you're saying is wrong. Fascism seeks to nip critique in the bud by stifling the fundamental concept of disagreement in the first place. If you don't learn how to criticize, then you might never turn that ability on your regime. Number 5. Fear of difference. The fear of difference refers to having a homogenized collective society, a society encouraged to view any outsider as different. Different people introduce different attitudes, different ways of life, and different thinking. Diversity might encourage members of that collective society to question why their society is so different from everyone else's. It might humanize members of a marginalized group. Fear of difference is emphasized because it teaches members of that society to reject any experience they might learn from. Teaching your society to fear differences, such as immigrants, also gives them a handy scapegoat to blame social and economic woes on, allowing the top of the hierarchy to avoid critique. Appeal to social frustration. Essentially, if you can get your populace to resent the people below them in the pecking order, claiming that immigrants are stealing your jobs, that poor people are stealing your taxes by exploiting social services, or associating impoverished neighborhoods solely with violent crime, you can get your middle class to punch down a lot more easily than you can get your collective to punch up. The appeal to social frustration is a self-nourishing Ouroboros. The more divided people are, the more miserable you can make them, and the more you can divide them further. The obsession with a plot. One potent observation about fascism is that it's self-defeating. This is largely due to the obsession with a plot, the need for fascism to create a story in which it is always the hero. Without an enemy, the ideology falls apart, and there is no justification for the extreme militarism and subservience to the state, so it must constantly invent an enemy. If there is no external enemy, it makes one, and if it cannot do so, it turns inward until it cannibalizes itself. The enemy is both weak and strong. Leading on from that previous point, whichever enemy chosen by fascism must be simultaneously weak and strong, where an enemy must be strong enough to be a problem demanding extreme militarism and subservience to the state. It must be strong enough to require every foot on the ground, everyone's participation in destroying it. But it must also be weak. It must also be pathetic. It must be weak enough that the collective are convinced that they are morally and physically superior, so much so that any victory would surely be a laughable sweep. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. This goes hand in hand with the plot obsession. The insistence that there must always be a war, always be fighting, always be an enemy, even if the regime cannibalizes itself, is at odds with this concept of ultimate triumph and peace. If there's peace, then there's no driving force behind getting your populace to accept extreme militarism. There's no struggle for life, rather a life of struggle. To choose pacifism is to let the enemy win. It's action for action's sake. Contempt for the weak. Elitism is part and parcel of fascist ideology. This works alongside collective narcissism, the tendency to exaggerate the positive image of one's collective. Basically, anyone in the collective is good, elite, morally righteous, superior in every way. Outsiders, including exiled groups within the collective, are weak. This also encourages people all the way up the chain of command to see everyone beneath them as lesser. Everybody is educated to become a hero. This one's a lot worse than it sounds. Synonymous with heroism is martyrs, noble and heroic sacrifice. If everyone is taught to be a hero, then every member of the collective is taught to assume that they are on a grander path, that their deaths will contribute towards the wider victory in the regime's unending fights against whichever enemy they have branded their next. The cult of heroism is the cult of death. Often, and mysteriously and coincidentally, this will be the death of your subordinates first. I mean, you're too important to blindly sacrifice yourself, so better send someone else off to do it for you. Like the Master Ball, you're saving your big important sacrifice for the right time. Machismo and weaponry. Machismo is a fantastic one to unpack because it exemplifies an inherent disdain for women and non-standard sexual habits, so homosexuality really. Virility is instead channeled through weaponry, the use of which becomes almost a sexual exercise of phallic worship. Women who engage in sex are unchaste whores. Any kind of sex beyond conventional procreation becomes deviant, and so the hero of fascism cannot acknowledge or engage. The art of war fills the void left behind. Interestingly, the Nazis raped just about everyone during the Soviet invasion, often with no punishment, so this is hypocritical, like so much else with the Nazis. Selective populism. Again, a really interesting one. The idea here is that the people of a fascist regime all have identical shared beliefs, referred to as a common will. Only it's the dictator that receives this will, interprets it, and makes decisions of it. Like the ancient rulers who claim to channel messages from the gods, a fascist dictator will make whatever choices he wants to make under the assertion that it's merely him doing what's best for the people. This is really effective in terms of destroying democracy in a very sneaky way, because it's a subterfuge. Democratic institutions become delegitimized. They can be dismantled because, supposedly, the fascist leader knows what the people want and interprets it directly. Why have time-wasting democratic systems in place to slowly and bureaucratically disseminate the common will when a dictator can just say it? Only, obviously, that's not how it goes. Fascism speaks Newspeak. Finally, this one is named a little confusingly. Newspeak can also be described as an impoverished vocabulary or an elementary syntax, i.e. writing extremely simply. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, Newspeak is propagandistic language that is characterized by euphemism, circumlocution, and the inversion of customary meanings. The term was coined by George Orwell in his novel 1984. Newspeak, designed to diminish the range of thought, was the language preferred by Big Brother's pervasive enforcers. Types of Newspeak in Orwell's 1984 include the elimination of certain words, or the removal of unorthodox meanings from certain words, the substitution of one word for another, e.g. uncold instead of warm and ungood instead of bad, the interchangeability of the parts of speech, such that any word in the language could be used as either noun, verb, adjective, or adverb, e.g. the word cut no longer existed, and the term knife acted as both the noun and verb, as in the sentence, she knifed the bread, and the creation of words for political purposes, e.g. good think, meaning orthodoxy, or to think in an orthodox manner. This is two-pronged in its approach. Firstly, it ensures all of its messages are digestible by absolutely everyone across a spectrum of intelligence. But secondly, it also stifles the critical reasoning by stopping people from needing to think about how and what is being disseminated to them. Right, so what does this have to do with Outlast Trials? It's never specifically stated what your character has entered the trials of Outlast Trials to learn. Whatever our ends are, we can only really glean through the current existing endings for the game. After escaping the Farewell Mansion and a segment of gameplay that can only be done single player, makes sense obviously, but it was really weird to vanish from the party for 45 minutes, your reagent is tossed out onto some expanse of water in the dark with only a light to swim towards. The light engulfs you when you wake up sometime later. Depending on the ending, you'll be in one of four places. One ending takes place in a hotel room in Cuba. Since Outlast Trials takes place in 1959, we can assume you're placed there after your tenure in the trials for reasons relating to America's personal beef with communism. You may have played a part in the Bay of Pigs invasion of 1961. Roughly 1,500 opponents to Fidel Castro stormed Cuba to try and overthrow Castro and steal power, but failed. This invasion was funded by the USA, so maybe you were involved. One ending takes place in China, where you wake up next to a man in his undies who is clearly overdosing on a bag of drug you see nearby. He foams at the mouth. Judging by the blueprints for atomic weapons you find in that room, we can assume that this man was some sort of prolific Chinese scientist who you have essentially assassinated by seducing and then personally overdosing. In one ending, you're in the same pod that Billy, first Wall Rider host, could be found in at the end of the first Outlast game. Only this takes place in the 1960s, meaning you're likely part of the failed Wall Rider project that resulted in Mount Massive's 1961 shutdown. That could only mean bad things for you, sorry. The other ending is the shortest ending. You're in a car driving through the streets of Vietnam. You have a bomb strapped to your chest. You pull up outside the Hotel Saigon as the bomb ticks to 0 and the screen cuts to the black, implying you have died in the explosion. The implication here is that you enact a trigger event that will justify intensified American interests in Vietnam. In 3 of those endings, you are disrupting events that form a pretext for American political overreach and justify them getting involved in other governments to destabilize their infrastructure and gain control by quote-unquote helping them restore democracy. The 4th ending just appears to be referential to the first game. The trials are an unofficial but government-backed extension of the MK Ultra program, a program that occurred between the 1950s and 1970s in America to investigate the impact of using specific psychoactive drugs like LSD on interrogation and torture, which came in the form of anything ranging from verbal abuse to straight physical abuse to isolation to hypnosis to sexual abuse to sensory deprivation and electroshock torture. Obviously, Outlast Trials takes significant creative liberty off the back of this already fairly crazy story, but assumes that these trials were successful in producing sleeper agents conditioned to what? Well, let's unpack them. So, who are you in Outlast Trials? Well, you're an unnamed reagent. In fact, you're a sequence of unnamed reagents that arrive in the facility and die and die and die, remaking more as you continue to play. You could just make one reagent and stick with them for the entirety of your playtime if you want, but you'd also miss out on all the endings and some of the cosmetics, so you know, maybe take one for the team, John Outlast. The details of your past life are never told to you, although we can glean a few things. In the introduction, you are presented with 2 boxes of files labelled private and public and told to destroy them, and your character does that very promptly. Although you're the one controlling them, the animations involved in handling these files is pretty urgent, there's no hesitation, so you can assume what you want there. Now, there are 2 possible interpretations to take from this. Firstly, we can assume that this is just Murkoff ensuring you disappear. It's a physical allegory for wiping your personhood from the state, so even if people remember who you are, there will be no physical record you existed. Obviously, they'll have all your files neatly shredded behind the scenes. The boxes could just be dummies intended to serve as a metaphorical demonstration of your compliance, but this is my personal interpretation. However, you could also assume that the implication here is that whatever you were up to before arriving in the facility is so bad that your character cooperates immediately. Although your private life was hidden, Murkoff sees all, and they used it here to force your compliance. By breaking you down in this manner, forcing you to destroy your own life for them, it's arguable that you become more pliable. We can also discern that by merely being at the facility in the first place, you volunteered for the fake charity program Murkoff advertised, so likely you were down in your luck, needing charitable assistance, and willing to throw whatever you could out into the world to find a ray of hope. Outlast Trials features a surprisingly in-depth character customization menu for a first-person horror game where you have a mask on your face 80% of the time, and most outfits cover your face entirely. You can spend a while getting your mini-me just right, only when you finish the game and your baby is tossed back out into the world to die by suicide bomb, you're dropped straight back into the facility and told to make another character. At that point, I just picked whatever the randomizer settled on. The moment you realise how disposable these player characters are is the moment you stop bothering to make them cute and just start shotting them out into the facility, interchangeable. I think that worked pretty effectively, combining a lush and brimming character creation feature with motivation to neglect it. It creates a situation wherein you either make the same character over and over, just pretending that they're all the same person, or you just throw out whatever the game gives you. In both instances, there's no individuality, just one herd. As the player, you also passively get into the rhythm of creating and injecting reagents into the facility, knowing you're sending them into their torture and eventual death. Just like the personnel managing their safety and education, your subordinate goes to their death first. Like, the only way you can resist is by not playing the game, so obviously you're going to make characters, but it still kinda counts. The concept of people being reagents both dehumanizes and weaponizes them. Not only are they literally named to refer to mere tools in an experiment, the trial and error work of a company who tests wantonly on real human lives, but any such tool that survives the experiment goes out to become a sleeper agent in the real world, causing political unrest that the USA can exploit. By dehumanizing the reagents, their superiors, the personnel responsible for their care and conditioning, treat them with contempt. Referring to the reagents as objects is an active step to make this easier. The only outcome of the reagents' conditioning is action for action's sake: terror attacks, violence, international overreach. Upon release from the facility, you become a sleeper agent triggered by the code phrase Spider Eye Lamb. To do what? Well, we don't know specifically, but we do know that it ends in death and political instability. One thing I love about Outlast Trials is that it gives you your own little bedroom you can decorate however you want, with currency earned by performing well in trials. You can change the carpet, the wallpaper, the sink bathroom tile bit. You can add decoration around the room on the shelves and as posters. You can also unlock a series of outfits to wear by accessing the catalogue in your inventory, earning access to anything ranging from a slightly different coloured shirt to full ludicrous outfits. And I love this for ways the game intends and for ways the game does not intend. So let's say we go out and do a trial and we risk our lives and we come back with enough money to buy a poster or two. What kinds of things do we have available? Firstly, the Outlast Trials room customization options are saturated with Christian memorabilia, statues of the Virgin Virgin Mary, bread and grapes for the nightstand, crucifixes, etc. It's unusual to be given church decor in a horror game, but when you realise that this is feeding into the cult of tradition checkbox of the fascist checklist, you start to understand why. No, I'm not suggesting that Christianity is a cult or Christianity is fascism. Rather, I'm saying that the higher-ups of the Trials facility make these things available to your character on purpose, to instill the concept of traditional religion in their everyday lives and make it a through line to their environment. It's not about Christianity as such, it's about American tradition with which Christianity is strongly associated. It is about following the natural hierarchy, and it is about seeing an individual above you as a one true leader. Religious fundamentalists are also typically extremely right-leaning, which, as Umberto Eco pointed out, can naturally lead to fascism. Brazil's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, is an outspoken supporter of the military dictatorship that was going on in the 60s in Brazil, and used this motto, "Brazil above all, God above everyone," as his slogan. It harkens back to the Germany above all used by the Nazis. He also frequently used the God, country and family motto to reflect traditional conservative political beliefs, and was used all the time by the BIA, Brazilian Integralist Action, an ultranationalist conservative far-right movement in Brazil in the 30s. If we take a closer look at the posters you can place around your room, we'll find some fantastic examples of fascist teachings delivered in overly simplistic slogans and images. My favourite and most overt posters are the simply written "Obedience breaks chains," "Cooperation is better than conflict," and "Truth in power" posters. I love "Obedience breaks chains" because it harkens back to the idea that you need to politely protest in a corner of a tucked away field and be as undisruptive as possible to get your demands met. This myth that passivity is rewarded when actually it's exploited. Your own action becomes a stick to beat you with. "Cooperation is better than conflict" may apply to members facing the trial together, but just as much applies to cooperation with superiors, even when those superiors seek to do you harm. It depicts two monkeys pulling in different directions until they relent, allowing one to get a banana first and then the other gets a turn. The messaging behind this teaching is, you stop struggling, let me have mine, and then I'll let you have yours. You comply with me and give me everything I want, and then I'll let you be free, it suggests. But is that really true? The implication of the poster is that it's two equals, rendering the message so insidious because it's superficially agreeable. Like, who wants conflict? It's always better for human beings to cooperate with each other, but what this propaganda is doing is substituting who is cooperating with who. It's not human beings cooperating with one another, it's subjects cooperating with state repression. Truth in power is a little bit more sophisticated because I remember wrinkling my nose at it for a moment, wondering what exactly was wrong with the wording when it hit me. I was anticipating the slogan to mean power in truth, like to know the truth is to have power. But actually, truth in power tells us that whoever is in power is telling the truth. Not only is history written by the victors, but history is written by the strong. This is a flip of a common Latin expression, veritas lux mea, or truth is my light. Plenty of universities use veritas, truth, but this flips the meaning from truth being the guiding force to power guiding truth. We also have a few posters that feign interest in your personal health. The Britain Wants You inspired "Your Health is Our Priority" poster reminds trial participants that cigarettes, candy, caffeinated beverages, alcohol, outside food, and unauthorized hygiene products are strictly prohibited in the sleep room. The Murkoff and You poster shows a very different reality than the one we faced in the introduction of this game, where a man shakes hands with a member of the medical personnel while they jab him in the arm with a syringe, a feigned demonstration of mutual respect tainted by an active poisoning. Finally, for a good sleep, count your sheep is, well, to be fair, that's pretty good advice. The thin blue line poster refers to the idea that the police are all that separate a lawless society from one of utter chaos. They are the thin blue line that protects us from total social evil. This is a heavily debated idea, and one I don't really have any interest in unpacking fully today, but it harkens to the idea that society is inherently violent and the police are our front line in a never-ending war. It suggests that the enemy is strong enough to be a constant threat to civilization, that the police need our constant support to maintain that thin blue line, but also that the enemy is weak enough to never actually be a threat to the police, and champions an image of violent, masculine domination. Finally, we see no matter the cost, we must save the children, depicting two parents in a traditional household. They have blended their own limbs into goop to put into a baby's bottle, implying that we need to stand together now and sacrifice ourselves for the children, a demographic intended to inspire emotion without ever needing to specify details. Nazi Germany famously fetishized the family, but weren't the only fascist regime to do so. An American neo-Nazi group, the Patriot Front, also has a poster like this, stating "Strong families make strong nations," tying this concept of the family to concepts of militarism and unbreaking loyalty. In the Our Little Secret poster, we see exactly the kind of thing they're supposed to be protecting them from: Mother Gooseberry feeding them cocaine. okay, Murkoff. And, oh, what's that? Overly simplified, digestible language? With that said, I think there's a particular irony to coming home from a day of work and buying the Outlast Trials Battle Pass, getting given your fake digital currency that you use to put a different poster up in your fake bedroom. Despite the game's satire come parody nature, I do not think this irony was intentional. Outlast Trials is a live service game, so it makes money by selling you digital t-shirts with real money that you do not own, especially when we compound that with many of the available posters being made with slapdash AI. Like, you could argue that the Murkoff Corporation would use AI because they're a company that cuts corners, but I don't think I'm going to buy that reasoning. Stepping beyond our room into the wider hub area, we find an environment full of monitors flashing simple messages. Freedom is waiting. Truth is power. These messages are easily digestible to the point of almost being subliminal. Like, the logic behind them assumes that your brain will just process them as you wander around your home base until it's totally ingrained. The main set of trials are labelled under the Genesis program, The Path to Rebirth, conflating their depraved depths with an almost religious restart, an immaculate conception. The implications of Genesis implies that trial participants will be built from scratch by a loving God, which is obviously not true, but speaks to and exploits traditional religious language. The first trial in the game, titled Kill the Snitch, occurs in a police station named the Thin Blue Line. Very subtle, very tasteful, where we meet Sergeant Leland Coyle. Leland Coyle is a prime asset, an in-universe term to describe a member of the X-Pop, short for experimental population, who is such a danger to society that they basically get offered a full-time gig working in the trials. In-game, they're completely unique enemies with unique skill sets. Coyle is a corrupt and delusional police officer who rules the Thin Blue Line by method of autocracy, the cornerstone of fascism. He leads off the back of his personal law, which is whatever he wants, however he wants it. Coyle is the prime asset we learn the most about by miles. Coyle was married 3 times, each woman dying mysteriously shortly thereafter. His first spouse passed away 6 months after their wedding, under circumstances officially attributed to a fall down the stairs, after which he joined the US Marine Corps to circumvent scrutiny from local authorities. Coyle's second wife fled to Chicago, where she was found deceased under circumstances officially labelled as natural causes, and her family all died within a year, all deaths attributed to suicide under increasingly violent and complex methodologies. His third wife succumbed to multiple gunshot wounds to the head, ruled as a suicide. Coyle is clearly a parody on the grim domestic violence statistics related to police officers, and the way that the law will shield their own even when the circumstances of crime are obvious to everyone who can see. The number that gets quoted a lot is 40% on the OIDV, Officer Involved Domestic Violence, but that study was made in the early 90s, and there's some who will discredit it due to its age or lack of cohesive data since. Some other studies will put it at 28% and some as low as 17%. Alex Roslin, author of Police Wife, The Secret Epidemic of Police Domestic Violence, has suggested that police are 15 times more likely to commit domestic abuse than the average American. Outlast Trials compounds this with the context that Coyle was extremely popular and well liked on the job as well as privately, despite his suspiciously disappearing wives. He enjoyed being social as both a member of the Elk Club and VFW, having a high standing in both. Coyle employs extreme physical and sexual abuse. All the mannequins in his trial have singed genital areas, even the men. One female mannequin is left broken and covered in sperm, bent over a table. Coyle's proclivity for abusing both genders may be a violent symptom of suppressed bisexuality, or, more my interpretation, merely a desire to dominate and humiliate. The whole time he roams, he screams things like, "This country is going to shit and ruination," the implicit flipped coin of the statement, "Make America Great Again." Purifying the country or state of inferior blood is a common fascist talking point, but this may be a stretch as that's part and parcel for most political movements today. As the player, you must navigate around him to kill the snitch, a tied-up man with a cloth bag over his head and the word snitch carved into his chest, who outright states in his dialogue that he was previously a reagent who did this very trial himself, knowing how it will end. There are a few trapped victims you encounter during the trials. The Vindicate the Guilty trial and the Cleanse the Orphans trial feature a judge and a bootleg Jesus respectively, the Grunts in the latter trial referring to this being the 5th Jesus this week. Considering the sheer amount of trials occurring in this facility at any one time, and the fact that many of the trapped victims directly refer to their own time as reagents, we can glean that some who pay for their escape are instead brought back in as fodder. As with typical fascist regimes, this is a symptom of the self-defeating obsession with plot. Without an enemy, without a snitch to punish, the ideology of fascism falls apart. Why doesn't Murkoff use actual snitches, actual whistleblowers? Because there are nowhere near enough to form the central focus of these trials, especially not when they know what the outcome will be. But Murkoff can't cancel this trial. To cancel this trial would be to imply that this evil has been vanquished, and action for action's sake requires a constant war against an omnipotent enemy. Without an enemy, the ideology falls apart alongside the justification for militarism and subservience. So Murkoff invents an enemy by taking reagents who paid for their freedom. The scapegoat enemy also confirms this, an enemy that hides and cries in corners but will attack if it feels threatened. When listening to his under-table mumblings, you'll make out lines like, "Why would they want to hurt me? I'm just like them. I was them. Can't they fucking see that? There's no freedom. It's a lie. I'm the ghost of fucking Christmas future, you ignorant fucking dummies," confirming his new role within the trials as a monstrous bit of set dressing. However, they're pathetic and ugly and scared and they lash out, so your reagent never seems to register it. You can glass them too. As part of the trial's description, we are told false witnesses must not be allowed to spread false lies, implying that this snitch is a man who has come forward to report the good guys for crimes, and that choice is one deserving of the death sentence. This trial has 3 MK challenges associated with it, each with their own very telling descriptions. Cancel the autopsy announces that corpses offer forensic facts incompatible with our truth, grind the bodies into a factually correct slurry, phrasing similar to the Alternative Facts press release of 2016. Sabotage the lockdown states, if you can open doors, no prison can hold you. Power the generator to enable your escape, which may merely refer to a training exercise for sleeper agents rather than any kind of fascist teaching. However, release the prisoners description states, only Murkoff arbitrates justice. Free the conflicts falsely imprisoned for their conspicuous guilt. The descriptive text of this trial and its respective challenges places a particular onus on you to right the wrongs of the unspecified enemy who falsely imprisoned convicts, including you. We see the same in the Vindicate the Guilty trial, the description of which states, we must not allow our innocent institutions to be persecuted for their clear guilt. MK challenges in the Vindicate the Guilty trial contribute to this. Escape the Courthouse announces, don't let the pain of our victims restrict your liberty. Kill the scapegoats, free them of their suffering, and you of your bondage. And Destroy the Evidence adds, if there is no evidence, there is no crime. Destroy the proof of our mistakes, and then we never did anything wrong. The idea imprinted here is that we are good, we are correct, and it's almost a bit too on the nose. Everyone who opposes us is incorrect and bad. Frame innocent people and create scapegoats who are forced to die for our success. They're suffering, but not by us. They're suffering because they're scapegoats that we created. Kill them to ease their suffering. It's just. No, we can't save them. They're scapegoats because they were weak enough to be used by us. They're beneath us. It's better to just kill them. Particularly when Murkoff is our arbiter of justice and also the voice of the people, the common will. The implication is that you are doing a favour to everyone around you by interfering in this gross miscarriage of justice. As specified by the many propaganda posters littering the trials and the sleep rooms, truth in power. It doesn't matter if the convicts have conspicuous guilt, they're above guilt in the hierarchy by mere virtue of being with us, the good guys. The bad guys wouldn't understand. And if you don't agree, then you're a bad guy too. The first trial you may encounter Mother Gooseberry in is called Cleanse the Orphans, the description of which tells us, sway the children from the teachings of Mother Gooseberry. Gooseberry's story is far less relevant to her place in the trials than Coyle. While Coyle seemed to be inserted as a calculated choice by Murkoff, being that he is the perfect combination of unresting, unrelenting dedication and twisted motivation, Mother Gooseberry plays more like a run-of-the-mill killer based on various prolific murderers, fictional and otherwise. Raised by her dentist father, Gooseberry worked as his assistant, using her puppets to distract adolescent patients during surgery. She was so prolific a performer that she eventually built up her own studio, Futterman Studios, where her show The Mother Gooseberry Hour began airing in 1951. Her father died and his body was never found. His death coincided with Mother Gooseberry's mental breakdown, which was reflected in the tone of her Gooseberry Hour. She used her mail-order dental drops business to dish out drugs to children. She encouraged them to engage in violence that allegedly escalated as far as murder. The children watching the show worshipped her. The only meaningful connection between Mother Gooseberry and the Outlast Trials I can find was made by Reddit user new_chain146, who pitched, I suspect that she was a puppet of her dentist father, and that her father might have been connected to Murkoff in some fashion. I reckon her show was an early attempt at subliminal programming for kids, and Project Lathe is essentially recycling Gooseberry after she stopped being useful publicly. The fact that she gets really angry at the reagents for killing kids reminds me of Chris Walker, in that she's probably trying to kill you to protect the public from what Murkoff has in store for them. New Chain goes on to suggest, Gooseberry really hates the religious propaganda that Murkoff tries to make the reagents believe is better than the hedonism she espouses. Easterman does mention in a document that she psychologically associates him with her abusive father, so she might be stuck between loathing the reagents for being Easterman's proxies and still feeling obligated to do his bidding. I really get the sense that Gooseberry and Coyle are presented as two sides of the same brutal coin. Coil is patriarchal order, while Gooseberry is matriarchal chaos. And I think there's a lot of merit in that interpretation. Coil runs the thin blue line under his self-imposed and self-reasoned law. He is the judge, jury, and executioner, keeping people following the law he has decided to put in place. On the other hand, Gooseberry can be found at Futterland, a huge carnival full of rides and games, or the orphanage, where the mannequin children play in their dormitories, sit in for lessons, and pray at the chapel. Mother Gooseberry is the most interesting prime asset because despite being a seasoned and capable murderer, the inherent machismo of the fascist attitudes of Outlast Trials means she is thoroughly demeaned and disrespected by members of the trial's personnel and the trial text itself. Coil and baby-faced killer Franco Barbie are treated with clinical neutrality, yet Gooseberry is actively opposed. Obviously, I'm not saying Mother Gooseberry needs to be heralded as some sort of girl boss, but I'm more comparing the striking difference in how she is regarded by the people who use her as a weapon, relying on her strength and precision while simultaneously insulting her. In the MK challenge Kill the Futterman, the description reads, "People are not toys. Stop Mother Gooseberry from making a human Dr. Futterman," highlighting that hypocrisy in values. The fatherland, the government, the state may use the members of Outlast Trials as toys and objects and as reagents, but they take personal issue with Mother Gooseberry doing the same. While Coil's trials focus around the rejection of truth and the violent stamping out of disagreement, Gooseberry's trials revolve around the weakness of motherhood and the importance of the fatherland, as represented by the education and religious systems children are to be fed through. The trial's description states, "Teach the children, give them first communion, and make them ours," and in-game recorded voice adding, "Education establishes obedience and faith makes it manifest." We have to save the orphan from her hedonistic teachings, hedonism being the ethical theory that pleasure, in the sense of the satisfaction of desires, is the highest good and proper aim of human life. Gooseberry acts promiscuously, in-game dialogue confirming she has sexual relationships with the guards and seduces some of the inmates. I don't know why you would dare let her near your shit, but you do you. Still, to compare the reception of her wanton sexuality with Coil's repressed self-hatred at the existence of his own sexuality reveals a rejection of hedonism by the thinkers at Murkoff. The player is aligned so as to see that as pathetic. The way of strength is the way of shoving any thought deep down until it's gone. While the tasks on Coil's map require us to kill the snitch and vindicate the guilty, working around him as an occupational hazard, Mother Gooseberry's tasks ask us to stop the children from being corrupted by her specifically. Gooseberry is the enemy in her simulations. Hedonism isn't represented through the mannequin children as sexuality, but as wanton violence. In the classrooms of the orphanage, we see them stabbing pieces of meat on a table until we change the movies playing on screen, at which point the mannequins put their hands to their mouths in silent surprise and cease performing violence. Murkoff depicts hedonism in the most destructive evil ends, as though the pursuit of self-satisfaction will inevitably always lead to circumstances mirroring the purge. This calls to pearl-clutching social concerns that the youth are dangerous, especially those who believe that they have been pushed to violence by things like television. There's no room for nuance in the story they're telling, because to apply nuance would be to allow interpretation. The children are re-educated by turning on radios that spout a recorded message on repeat, telling a curious story of Jesus Christ and the communion. When the wavelengths are tuned, the radio tells us, "Communion is how we remember a deal the good people made with Jesus before the bad people murdered him. Jesus had a dinner party with the good people just before he died. He would come back to reward the good people and punish the bad people. Communion is the way that we show we'll promise to stay good. We have faith. We'll never change our mind." The implicit through line of this message is that there are good people and bad people. The good people are us, since we do communion. The bad people are the people who do not do communion. Ergo, do communion and be part of us, and be morally superior to the people who do not. In fact, you should be scared to be different, because it means that Jesus will punish you. The Grind the Bad Apples trial tells us, eliminate the misbehaving children. Take them to the root canal where the good children won't see you give them a gentle correction. Aligning that holy and perfect righteous judgment with us, the good guys, and Murkoff giving the order. Murkoff aligns itself with Christianity and takes on the mantle of Christ to justify its decisions. The MK challenge Gather the Children of God tells us, too much mother love makes a weak child. The game tells us, gather the children and bring them to the priest for a more strenuous education. Despite the emphasis on family, as demonstrated by the propaganda posters we see, family without a father figure is seen as weak and disorganized. In lieu of a worthy family, a single mother figure not qualifying to be considered worthy, it's seen as preferable that these children are sent to the priest instead. We see this in the second MK challenge titled Foster the Orphans, which commands save the children from Mother Gooseberry and lead them to their new foster home. One MK challenge associated with this level, titled Feed the Children, has you rush the orphanage and fill their soup with bleach, causing all the mannequin children to die. The description tells you, provide the children with the nutrition they deserve. Deserve being the pertinent word here. These children are still at the orphanage, meaning they are still with Mother Gooseberry, so they deserve of death instead. It also links back to the concept of righteous punishment we saw in the recordings about Jesus returning to punish the bad people. Mother Gooseberry can also be found in the trial Pervert the Futterman, the description of which reads, "You are the revelator. What you build exposes the perversion latent in every heart. We cannot allow hidden messages and innuendo to corrupt our children. Expose, humiliate, and destroy the deviant, and we will let you out." As with the scapegoats in Vindicate the Guilty, Murkoff takes the concept of perversion latent in every heart, and hidden messages and innuendo, and ascribes that guilt entirely to one deviant. Notice the extremely vague language used in this description, and how it can be applied to basically anything you want it to. This is the obsession with a plot that manifests in Murkoff's trials. There's always someone doing something that disrupts the true vision of this wonderful state, so they must die. The associated MK challenges are just as telling. Crush the Sex Toys announces in the same tone as they're putting razor blades in your kids' Halloween candy that discreet packaging hides dangerous perversion. Shine a light to expose the boxes of sex toys, then crush them with industrial force. And Incinerate the Sex Toys adds perversion on an industrial scale ferments widespread corruption and disobedience. Push the production carts of sex dolls into the incinerator and burn the sickness. And so, as we toss sealed containers of kids' toys in the incinerator without ever opening them to check, our reagent takes these teachings without question. Yes, our reagent nods. There is a shadowy kind of person who corrupts our children. Yes, it is a perversion. Can we think of any marginalized group that the Nazis claimed was spreading widespread corruption and disobedience? One that is maybe seeing a resurgence of that today, alongside social frustrations and fears of the different? Currently, there are only 3 prime assets in Outlast Trials. The third is Franco Barbie, otherwise known as Il Bambino, meaning the child, or Lupa, meaning she-wolf. The latter potentially a reference to mythical brothers Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome, a typical favourite ancient civilization of fascists. Franco Barbie is described as a gun-wielding man-child, which is true for him in the most literal sense. He radiates mummy issues, and they manifest in the worst ways. Franco represents the hypocrisy in rejecting modernism. He is a man who craves his mother, which manifests as a humiliating weakness. He was also a mafia don and controlled the drug trade. Murkoff maintains that drugs are bad, as we see when Mother Gooseberry is damned for her usage and selling of it. But when applied to Franco, the narrative changes. In a godless world, opiates will be the religion of the masses, claims the description of the Poison the Medicine trial. Take control of production and you can kill with the nonchalance of a god. Franco Barbie sits somewhere between Coyle's steadfast masculine violence and Mother Gooseberry's chaotic weak motherhood, as a man who overcorrects on his insecurities around his own masculinity with extreme violence. He still serves as a tool the same way that Mother Gooseberry does, but is held in contempt as a man still reliant on his mother's milk. Franco Barbie is the most direct possible callback to machismo and weaponry. While Coyle derives sexual pleasure from torturing and killing people, it's not his bread and butter, it's just a nice perk of the job for him. For Franco Barbie, sexual pleasure is the how, the why, and the when of his killing. The source of his impotence is never explained, but his only ever successful sexual relationship was with his stepmother Angelina Barbie, whose degrading and berating of Franco was the only thing capable of arousing him. Beyond that, Franco Barbie cannot get going sexually and murdered his sexual partners, potentially out of frustration, potentially because he was only capable of conflating sexual satisfaction with murder. Violence and sexuality go hand in hand for a man who collects nipples. Hearing tell of this depraved psychosexual murderer, Murkoff sent Agent Clyde Perry to track him down and recruit him for the trials. Only Clyde stumbled upon a scene of grisly detail. Franco had bored a hole inside the prostitute he was sleeping with, hiding in her chest cavity to simulate being in the womb. He kills one of the giant female grunts and engages in necrophilia with her corpse. The reagents are, to him, a direct affront to his masculinity, manifesting as territory and ego, and consequently he stops at nothing to seek them out and do horrible harm to them. The evaluation report is given to players upon completing a trial. You each get an individual score, and the average is taken for the group score. Although the individual score isn't commented on by the trial runners, the group score always earns a comment. Some of these will be fairly banal, things like at least they'll all fit in one grave, or crabs in a barrel if you do especially poorly, but a few comments made by the personnel grant enormous insight into what these trials are hoping to even achieve. Like grades in the A+ to A- range see an emphasis on cohesion and dedication, but we also see an acknowledgement of ego death. Ego death can have applicable meanings depending on context, but broadly speaking, ego death is a complete loss of subjective self-identity. This means you do not know who you are, what you are doing, what your past is, what your name is, how the people around you relate to you, what species you are. This is a failure to connect to your long-term memories. According to verywellmind.com, other life-altering experiences like near-death experiences and childbirth have also been linked to experiences akin to ego death. Although it's often linked with psychedelic use, spiritual people believe it may be induced by entering a deep meditative state, prayer, or a lifestyle of self-denial. Any reagent with an A+ rank may receive the comment, "Ego death has been achieved," clearly the expectation for these trials in order to receive a perfect grade. The trials seek to separate someone perfectly from their sense of self, to turn them literally into an object. And it's clear how key this is when we see that A ranks are labelled close to ego death, implying that a subject cannot be perfect if they haven't lost themselves completely. Secondly, we see A+ ranks noted for their cohesion to the point of unquestioning belief, aligning success with unquestioning belief. You might see the note, "highly advanced group of sadists." This may yet be the American century, a quote that aligns the American century with advanced sadism, creating detached human weaponry to do unthinking, unquestioning bidding. An A rank team might notice a similar sentiment in the note, "subjects displaying a near-religious enthusiasm for profitless self-harm." A note on a B grade result observes, "the group demonstrates real skill, but has stubborn fixation on civilized ideologies. Add more pain." A strange word choice for a fascist group. You think they'd see these ideologies as barbarian or degenerate. Another comment observes, "demonstrates skill, but resisting therapy." Subjects need to reject ideologies by their own accord, plus subliminals in NREM. A C rank result comments, "reagents may still be clinging to outer world assumptions, suggest finding methods of introducing additional trauma in the sleep room." What we can glean here is the emphasis not only on sadism and loss of self, but the complete rejection of empathy. Ideologies mean different, and different might mean a new perspective, and fascism strikes to wipe that clean. The trials are all about cleaning the state of an individual's personhood and returning them into the world as an unfeeling member of a hive mind they have no say in, but will be expected to die for when the time comes to defend the USA from, well, whatever Murkoff deems the bad guys at that particular moment. Even an A- is not sufficient by comparison, labelled only close to real dissociative sadism. But the real kicker here is the suggestion for improvements, which are increased to bigotry and cowardice in subliminals. The personnel running the trials seek to increase manifesting sadism through bigotry, specifically through turning on marginalised groups, socially cannibalising the reagents to increase the loyalty of the promising few. The nearly remarkable results, real effort on display, would be easier if there were a clearly disposable weak link among the groups cements this. Murkoff knows to isolate weaker, more vulnerable groups within the teams to be turned on, making the others stronger. Newspeak starts to crop up by the time we reach results in the latter B grades, the notes on which state, "groupthink encourages moral idiocy, but there's still a perverse insistence on individuation." We also see this in C grades who are observed as individuals still exhibiting individual shame, must encourage groupthink. Groupthink is an interesting term to use here, considering it was inspired by Orwell's 1984, which used the idea of doublethink for highly suggestive ideas or expressions. The parallels drawn between the Murkoff Corporation and actual fascist newspeak is so clear. And finally, in the case of 0 reagent deaths, we get the note, "this group seems to still fear death." Good thing? The post-trial evaluation notes are a great in-game way to see how you grow as a team, but demonstrate the worrying reality of your reagent's conditioning. Seeing what Murkoff considers to be good and bad aligns perfectly with the kind of teachings a fascist government would thrive off the back of. But what does this imply? The Outlast series has always been political, but it's one of those games where the experience is so solid and so distractingly scary that any average player could pick it up and put it down and barely put that 2 and 2 together. Deep contemplative reflection isn't what your thrill-seeking, chase-loving horror fan is going to go to Outlast for, and that's totally okay. Still, it is there, and as the series rolled on, it became progressively more and more obvious. The political connotations of Outlast 2 became pure satire in Outlast Trials, verging on parody in many cases, about the rising tides of fascist sentiment within the USA and how that manifests in the present day. No, obviously the Trials isn't trying to teach you to be a fascist, it is trying to point out how many of the current issues plaguing present-day society contribute to that metastasizing tumour. Fear of difference, i.e. fearing marginalised groups like immigrants and LGBT+ people. Contempt of the weak, like turning your nose up at the plight of poor people because they're simply not doing the right thing, simply not strong enough, simply not good enough, simply beneath you. Obsession with a plot, i.e. the rise of the now largely mocked QAnon, where every tweet, every post, every statement from people like Donald Trump was some assumed secret message intended to warn his millions of agents of the end times and mobilise them as such. The list goes on. Tell me your favourite primordial fascist sentiments in the comments below. Fascism's manifestation is insidious because you'd struggle to find any kind of communal structure without a symptom of it. Obsession with a plot, while exhausting, is not necessarily indicative of fascism. It's what a lot of conspiracy theories theories are founded upon, like the ice wall conspiracy theory that posits that Earth as we know it is encased in an ice wall, on the other side of which are civilizations like Asgard, Glania, and Horus. When facing our infinite tininess on this irrelevant planet spinning madly around one star out of 100 billion, people look for a greater story. Facing the fact that we could well be here by coincidence can be maddening to some people. Still, the slow creep from one checkpoint to the next, the bubbles of fascism rising up the chain of command until there is one divine leader, is a civilization long since established by the time your reagent finds themselves in the trials. Fascism is central to Murkoff because it entitles them to absolute control and an emotional detachment required to enact that control in inhuman ways. Fascism is central to their teachings because they want a mentally lost sleeper agent to perform their will, destabilizing other governments so that they might step in and inject their political motivations into the void left behind. On the whole, the Outlast Trials is a fun game to play with friends. At its most direct, however, it is an explicit observation of the way that society to and fro's in times of economic struggle, how the cruelest always rise above for the worst reasons, and how weirdly homoerotic it can be to electrocute men. Still, I hope you had a fun time unpacking this with me. Have a great one, I'll see you in the next video.